The emergency pager went off at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night while I was in the control room basement level at Millstone Nuclear Station, elbow deep in coolant system diagnostics, trying to stop a thermal regulation failure that was costing $12,000 per hour in emergency shutdown procedures. The pager vibrated against my belt. I ignored it, then it went off again. I pulled off my radiation gloves and checked the display. Marcus Webb, my supervisor at Nuclear Safety Solutions, calling from his suburban Atlanta office at what should be family dinner time with his yoga instructor wife. I almost didn't answer. When you're preventing a potential reactor cooling crisis that could affect 50,000 people in a 10-mile radius, phone calls from corporate feel less urgent than the temperature readings climbing toward critical thresholds in front of you. But I answered anyway because that's what 26 years of being a reliable crisis engineer conditions you to do. Patterson here. Gordon, it's Marcus. I need to inform you of a company decision. Effective immediately, we no longer require your services as senior nuclear safety engineer. Your employment is terminated as of today. I looked at the thermal monitoring console in front of me. Primary coolant temperature 565 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Secondary loop pressure dropping to 1,850 psi from normal operating range of 2,200 psi. Reactor core temperature differential showing 23-degree variation between fuel assemblies, well outside acceptable parameters. Jennifer Walsh, plant safety director, standing 8 feet away, looking at me with the kind of desperate hope you see when someone realizes their entire facility depends on one person who actually understands these 40-year-old reactor cooling systems. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll inform Jennifer that Nuclear Safety Solutions will be handling the thermal regulation procedures for the cooling crisis I'm currently managing. Silence long enough that I thought the encrypted connection might have dropped. What crisis? The coolant system failure that brought me to Millstone Station at 2 p.m. yesterday, primary and secondary cooling loops are showing thermal instability. The malfunction is costing approximately $12,000 per hour in emergency shutdown protocols and regulatory compliance delays. I'm in the middle of calculating thermal coefficients through 40-year-old reactor designs that predate most of your current staff. I assume you'll want to send someone else to complete the thermal modeling since I no longer work for Nuclear Safety Solutions. More silence. I could hear him breathing through the secure line. Gordon, let's discuss this after you've resolved the Millstone situation. I don't think that's appropriate. You just terminated my employment. I shouldn't be working on Nuclear Safety Solutions projects if I'm no longer a Nuclear Safety Solutions employee. I'll brief Jennifer on what I've discovered so far and catch the next shuttle back to Georgia. Or actually not back to the office since you said not to bother returning. Wait, Gordon, let me call you back. He ended the call before I could respond. My name is Gordon Patterson. Everyone calls me Gordy. I'm 49 years old, and I just got fired while managing a nuclear safety crisis that nobody else at my company knows how to solve. At 49, I thought I had maybe 15 good working years left before thinking about retirement and maybe that accessible house renovation Linda always wanted for her wheelchair mobility. I thought I'd built enough reputation and expertise to coast into my later years with respect and security. That phone call changed everything. And maybe it was time. Michael's medical bills were sitting on my kitchen table back in Marietta, $1,250 due next week for his insulin pump supplies. Linda's physical therapy appointments ran $380 twice weekly. Our son's type 1 diabetes wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Linda's disability from that reactor maintenance accident I'd investigated 8 years ago. Corporate loyalty wasn't going to pay those bills. Expertise might. Before I explain what happened over the next 72 hours, let me establish who I am and why that phone call was the most expensive mistake Marcus Webb ever made. I joined the Navy right out of high school in 1992. Spent 15 years in nuclear submarines, learned reactor systems when they still used analog controls and mechanical gauges. Back then, nuclear safety meant understanding physics and respecting radiation. When I got out in 2007, nuclear power was becoming more automated, but the old reactor designs weren't going anywhere anytime soon. Nuclear Safety Solutions hired me in 1998 as a thermodynamics engineer specializing in aging reactor safety protocols. My job was troubleshooting complex thermal regulation failures in systems that younger engineers didn't understand and couldn't repair. When a nuclear facility experienced cooling problems and their engineering department couldn't trace the thermal instability, they called Nuclear Safety Solutions. Nuclear Safety Solutions sent me, Over 26 years, I'd responded to 127 reactor emergencies across 12 states and 3 international installations. I diagnosed primary coolant leaks, calculated thermal coefficient variations, identified pump cavitation problems, and prevented overheating incidents that could have required massive evacuations. I'd worked through hurricanes, holidays, and family emergencies. I missed Michael's 16th birthday to fix a cooling crisis at Brunswick Nuclear Plant. I spent my 45th birthday in a reactor control room at Vogtle debugging thermal modeling calculations while Linda celebrated alone at our accessible home. That was before her accident. Before I learned that loyalty to your employer means nothing when you need time for medical appointments and disability accommodations. Linda was injured 8 years ago during a safety inspection I was conducting at Plant Hatch. Maintenance scaffold collapsed, 3 vertebrae compressed. Permanent wheelchair mobility. Michael got diagnosed with diabetes 2 years later. Emily's gone now, graduated and working in Denver. But Michael's 19 and managing a chronic condition that costs $15,000 annually, even with our insurance. Linda used to say during those long nights adjusting to wheelchair life, "You're too valuable to let one company control our future." She'd grown up watching her father work 35 years for the same power company, believing loyalty would guarantee security. When they got bought out, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 62. "Nobody looks out for you except you, Gordy," she'd tell me during physical therapy sessions. "Build something that's yours, not theirs." She's been pushing me toward independence for years, and maybe this forced moment was exactly what we both needed. Most importantly, I developed deep knowledge of aging nuclear reactor thermal systems that most of the industry still relies on, but nobody teaches anymore. Every plant had unique implementations. Every cooling system had custom modifications. Every safety protocol had quirks that existed only in my experience-based understanding of how those reactors behaved under thermal stress. That knowledge was what made me valuable. That knowledge was also what Marcus Webb had just eliminated from Nuclear Safety Solutions' crisis response capability at the worst possible moment. The Millstone crisis had started 26 hours earlier. Millstone Station and Seabrook Nuclear had both reported sophisticated coolant system irregularities, targeting their thermal regulation protocols within 3 hours of each other. Both installations used similar aging reactor designs from the 1980s. Both were experiencing identical thermal coefficient variations. This wasn't random equipment failure. Someone with serious technical knowledge was systematically testing the thermal limits of reactor cooling systems, looking for vulnerabilities in 40-year-old engineering that most people assumed was too regulated to be worth sabotaging. Nuclear Safety Solutions' standard protocol was remote diagnostics first. I spent 8 hours on secure video calls with each facility engineering teams, walking them through thermal analysis procedures and reviewing coolant system logs. By Thursday midnight, I determined this wasn't something that could be resolved remotely. The thermal patterns suggested someone with deep knowledge of reactor physics was systematically probing for weaknesses in cooling designs that most people assumed were too classified to be worth attacking. They were wrong. Old reactor designs aren't automatically secure reactor designs. They're just reactors that nobody remembers how to upgrade when they malfunction. I took the company van to Millstone Station Friday morning, arriving at the security checkpoint at 5 a.m. Jennifer Walsh met me at the containment entrance. She looked like she hadn't slept in 4 days, which she probably hadn't. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for coming. We've been in emergency cooling protocols for 20 hours. NRC is asking why we can't stabilize our own thermal systems. Because this thermal instability is targeting vulnerabilities that require hands-on reactor access to properly diagnose. I need to examine the coolant flow calculations directly." She led me to the reactor control room, banks of monitoring equipment, each one tracking thousands of thermal measurements per minute when they weren't locked down due to safety protocols. All showing amber warning lights now, all indicating thermal coefficients outside normal parameters, all costing Millstone approximately $5,000 per hour in emergency procedures. This was the kind of place that reminded me why I got into this business. These weren't just machines. They were the energy source for 600,000 homes. Every kilowatt, every thermal calculation, every safety protocol flowed through systems like these. When they went unstable, communities lost power and families faced emergency evacuations. I spent the next 12 hours analyzing the thermal patterns, identifying the exact cooling system routines someone was manipulating and mapping their testing methodology. This wasn't random equipment sabotage. This was sophisticated, methodical, and expensive. Someone had invested serious resources in understanding exactly how these old reactor cooling systems worked and where their thermal weak points were. By 8 p.m. Friday, I'd moved between both installations, finding identical thermal manipulation across every affected cooling system. The saboteurs weren't just targeting random nuclear facilities. They were specifically hitting installations that still used the aging thermal regulation protocols I'd helped design back in the late 1990s when I was still learning reactor physics. By 10:30 p.m. Friday, I'd isolated the vulnerability. The attackers were exploiting a thermal coefficient calculation error in aging reactor control software that handled coolant flow regulation. The vulnerability existed in custom thermal monitoring systems that Nuclear Safety Solutions had helped implement in 2001. I was part of the original engineering team. I was one of only 3 people who understood how that thermal regulation code worked. It's funny how nuclear technology works. We built these reactors to last 60 years, and they have. But 60 years in reactor terms means dealing with thermal problems nobody anticipated 4 decades later. The cooling systems we designed in 2001 were rock solid for their time. We never imagined that saboteurs in 2024 would have the computing power and patience to probe for thermal coefficient errors in control subroutines that processed maybe 200 calculations per day back then, but now handled 2,000. Fixing it required updating 40-year-old thermal modeling algorithms, recalibrating reactor safety protocols, and implementing new temperature validation routines that would prevent similar attacks without disrupting the facility's existing cooling operations. This wasn't like updating your thermostat. You couldn't just download a patch and restart. Every change had to be tested, validated, and implemented with surgical precision. One mistake and you could destabilize reactor cooling for days during active power generation. I estimated 16 to 20 hours of careful thermal engineering work across both installations. It was the kind of work that required not just technical knowledge, but institutional memory. You had to understand not just how the cooling systems worked, but why they were designed that way, what assumptions the original engineers made, and how those assumptions had changed over 4 decades of reactor operation. I started at 10:45 p.m. Friday night. By 11:47 p.m., I was halfway through recalibrating the first set of thermal algorithms when Marcus called and told me I was fired. After Marcus hung up, Jennifer approached me cautiously. You could see the panic starting to set in as she processed what she'd just overheard. "Mr. Patterson, is everything all right? You look concerned. I just got terminated by my employer while in the middle of stabilizing your reactor cooling systems." Her expression went from concern to terrified. In her world, nuclear facilities didn't just shut down for maintenance. Every hour these reactors stayed in emergency protocols was compromising power generation and putting ratepayers at risk. Terminated. "But you're the only person who understands our aging thermal protocols. What happens to our cooling systems? That's an excellent question. Nuclear Safety Solutions will need to send someone else to complete the work. How long will that take?" The other engineer who understands these reactor cooling systems is Timothy Brooks. He's in Belgium managing a European reactor contract. Nuclear Safety Solutions might have to wait until he becomes available. How long is Timothy's European engagement scheduled for? Another 18 days plus travel time. Jennifer's face went pale. I could see her doing the math in her head. We can't wait 18 days. Every day in emergency protocols compromises power generation and regulatory compliance. 18 days would put our operating license at risk. Then I suggest you contact Nuclear Safety Solutions Corporate and explain the urgency. At 1 to 2 a.m., my pager went off again. This time it was Richard Stone, Nuclear Safety Solutions Chief Operating Officer. Richard had been with the company for 19 years and understood exactly how critical my role was to nuclear crisis management. He was also smart enough to realize that Marcus had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Gordy, I just got off the phone with Marcus. There's been a misunderstanding about your employment status. We need you to complete the Millstone engagement before we discuss any personnel matters." Marcus was very clear. He said my employment was terminated effective immediately. That's not a misunderstanding, that's termination. I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Richard understood the implications in a way that Marcus obviously didn't. This wasn't just about one disgruntled employee. This was about Nuclear Safety Solutions' entire reputation in the nuclear power industry. I understand this is confusing, but let's focus on resolving the cooling crisis first. We can address your employment situation after you've stabilized the reactor systems. I don't think that's appropriate. If I'm terminated, I shouldn't be working on nuclear safety solutions projects. If I'm not terminated, then Marcus needs to call me back and clarify that he made an error. This is a critical nuclear safety situation. These cooling systems are essential for power generation. We need you to complete the thermal recalibrations. Then you need to clarify my employment status first. Am I a nuclear safety solutions employee or not? Long pause. I could hear Richard thinking through the implications. If he said I was still employed, he'd be contradicting Marcus's termination and creating internal political problems. If he said I was terminated, he'd be admitting that Nuclear Safety Solutions had just eliminated their crisis response capability in the middle of their most expensive emergency. Gordy, let me conference in Marcus so we can resolve this together. I'd rather you didn't. Marcus was clear about his decision. I'm respecting that decision by no longer working on Nuclear Safety Solutions projects. If Millstone needs assistance, they should contact Nuclear Safety Solutions Emergency Response Line and request another engineer. There is no other engineer available who understands these aging nuclear thermal systems. That's an unfortunate situation, but it's not my problem anymore since I'm no longer a Nuclear Safety Solutions employee. I ended the call. Jennifer was standing nearby, having heard my side of the conversation. The weight of the situation was settling on her shoulders. At my age, I'd seen this look before. The moment when someone in management realizes they're completely dependent on something they don't understand and can't control. What should we do, Mr. Patterson? You should contact Nuclear Safety Solutions and request emergency engineering support. Explain the urgency of the situation. They'll prioritize getting someone here as quickly as possible. But you're here now. You understand our systems. You were in the middle of fixing the thermal instability. Can't you just complete the work? I thought about that carefully. Back when I was younger. You'd finish the job regardless of company politics because it was the right thing to do. But I'd learned something important over 26 years in nuclear engineering and 15 years in the Navy. Honor has to go both ways. I'd given Nuclear Safety Solutions my best years, missed family time, worked through Linda's accident recovery, and built their reputation one crisis at a time. The moment it became convenient, they threw me away like contaminated equipment. Michael's medical supplies were due next week. Our mortgage wasn't going to pay itself. Corporate loyalty is a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I was fired 94 minutes ago. I can't ethically continue working on a project for a company that just terminated my employment. What if we hired you directly, not through Nuclear Safety Solutions, but as an independent consultant working for Millstone Station? Now, that was interesting. I'd never considered going independent. But at 49, maybe it was time to think about options beyond the corporate ladder. Linda had always said I was too valuable to let one company control our future. She'd grown up watching her father work 40 years for a power company only to get laid off 6 months before retirement. That would create contractual complications. Millstone has service agreements with Nuclear Safety Solutions. Those agreements probably have exclusivity provisions preventing you from hiring outside consultants to work on Nuclear Safety Solutions design systems. I'll check our contracts. She made several phone calls, had quick conversations that involved a lot of technical terms and urgent whispers, then looked at me with cautious optimism. Our legal team says the service agreement has exclusivity provisions for routine maintenance, but emergency thermal stabilization can be conducted by any qualified consultant if Nuclear Safety Solutions cannot provide timely support. They're defining timely support as within 18 hours of request. That was the opening I needed, not just to solve this immediate crisis, but to test whether there was a future beyond Nuclear Safety Solutions. At 49, I was too experienced to start over at another company, but maybe not too experienced to start working for myself. Have you formally requested emergency support from Nuclear Safety Solutions? She sent an encrypted email to Nuclear Safety Solutions Emergency Response Team, copying NRC, formally requesting immediate engineering support for the reactor cooling instability and noting that the previous engineer, myself, was no longer available to complete the thermal recalibration work. She marked it urgent and requested response within 8 hours. At 4:15 a.m., we received a response from Nuclear Safety Solutions Emergency Coordinator that told us everything we needed to know about how this was going to play out. We acknowledge your request for emergency engineering support. Our senior thermal engineers are currently committed to other client emergencies. We are working to identify available resources and will provide an estimated response timeline within 12 hours. 12 hours. In corporate speak, that meant they had no idea how to solve this problem without me, but they weren't ready to admit it yet. Richard was probably spending his Saturday morning calling every contractor and consultant he could find, trying to locate someone who understood reactor thermal systems well enough to not make the crisis worse. Jennifer showed me the email with the kind of desperate expression you see on people who are watching their career go down in flames through no fault of their own. What does this mean? It means Nuclear Safety Solutions doesn't have anyone available to send. Timothy is in Belgium, and apparently nobody else at Nuclear Safety Solutions has the expertise to handle reactor thermal vulnerabilities. So we wait, unless you want to exercise your contract provision and hire an independent consultant. Are you available as an independent consultant? This was the moment. At 49, after 26 years of nuclear engineering life, I was being offered the chance to work for myself, to set my own rates, choose my own projects, and never again have to worry about some cost-cutting manager deciding my expertise was too expensive. Linda had been right. This wasn't a crisis, it was an opportunity. I could be. What would your rate structure look like? I thought about that carefully. Independent consulting rates for emergency nuclear safety work typically range from $120 to $200 per hour, depending on expertise level and urgency. I was at the top of the expertise scale, and this was definitely urgent. But more than that, I was the only person available who could solve this problem. That kind of scarcity has value, $150 per hour for emergency thermal stabilization work. Minimum 20-hour engagement to ensure complete vulnerability correction and system validation. That's $3,000 total. Payment terms are 50% deposit before I resume work, remaining 50% upon successful reactor stabilization. Jennifer didn't even blink. When your nuclear reactor is showing thermal instability and you're facing NRC violations about power generation failures, $3,000 for a solution starts looking like a bargain. Done. I'll have our contracting office process the deposit immediately. The contracting process took until Saturday afternoon. Government paperwork, even in emergencies, moves at government speed. But by 2:30 p.m. Saturday, my pager chimed with a bank transfer notification. $1,500 had just cleared into my personal checking account. More money than I'd ever received for a single day's work in my entire career. At 3 p.m. Saturday, I resumed work on the reactor thermal stabilization protocols, but now I was working for myself. The funny thing about doing the same work as an independent consultant instead of a corporate employee is how different it feels. Every thermal calculation I performed was billable. Every problem I solved was building my reputation instead of someone else's company. Every decision was mine to make. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't just fixing someone else's crisis. I was building my own future. Building something for Michael's medical needs. Building something Linda would have been proud of. By Sunday morning, I'd completed the thermal stability corrections across both nuclear installations. The work went faster than I'd expected because I wasn't dealing with corporate approval processes or having to document every decision for managers who wouldn't understand the technical details. By Sunday afternoon, I'd updated the cooling protocols and conducted full thermal testing. By Monday morning, both installations were back to normal power generation with no thermal vulnerabilities and no cooling system processing errors. Total emergency protocol time, 32 hours. Total operational impact, approximately $384,000. But the reactors were stable, and the corrections I'd implemented would prevent similar thermal-based attacks in the future. More importantly, I'd just proven to myself that I didn't need nuclear safety solutions. They needed me. Jennifer was watching the thermal monitoring displays with visible relief as power generation levels returned to normal parameters. The green lights were beautiful, each one representing thousands of kilowatts that had been frozen for nearly 2 days, finally flowing through the grid like they were supposed to. Mr. Patterson, I cannot thank you enough. You saved us from a disaster that would have been catastrophically worse if we'd waited for Nuclear Safety Solutions to send another engineer. You're welcome. I'll prepare a technical report documenting the vulnerability, thermal manipulation methodology, and correction procedures. You should share that with Nuclear Safety Solutions so they can update their safety documentation. At 8:45 p.m. Monday night, I received a call from Richard Stone. I was back at my accessible home in Marietta, exhausted, but satisfied with the weekend's work. More than satisfied, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in work that was entirely mine. Gordy, I understand you completed the nuclear safety work as an independent consultant. We need to discuss your employment status. Marcus's decision to terminate you was premature. We'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. I appreciate that, but I'm declining. I'm now operating as an independent consultant. It's more lucrative, and I have better control over which projects I accept. What does that mean for nuclear safety solutions? You're our most experienced thermal systems expert. It means nuclear safety solutions will need to develop other engineers with similar expertise or accept that your crisis response capability is significantly reduced. The truth was, at 49, I'd finally learned what my father never had the chance to figure out. He worked 32 years for the same utility company, believing that loyalty and hard work would guarantee security. When the company got deregulated, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 59. He spent his last 8 working years bouncing between contract jobs, never again finding the security he'd thought he'd earned. I wasn't going to make his mistake. Not with Michael counting on me, not with Linda needing accessible home modifications. Over the next 6 weeks, I received 6 emergency calls from nuclear facilities and energy contractors experiencing thermal safety crises. Each call followed the same pattern: sophisticated attack on aging reactor systems. Nuclear safety solutions couldn't respond quickly enough. Could I help as an independent consultant? I helped all 6 clients. Total consulting revenue, $42,000 for 6 weeks of work. That was more than I'd made in the previous 8 months at Nuclear Safety Solutions. Word spreads fast in the nuclear safety industry. By September, I was receiving calls from facilities that had never worked with nuclear safety solutions, asking if I was available for thermal audits and ongoing vulnerability consulting. These weren't emergency calls. They were nuclear plants that wanted to prevent emergencies by having someone who understood their reactor systems before problems occurred. By November, I had 4 long-term consulting contracts with nuclear facilities who wanted guaranteed access to my thermal expertise when they needed it. Combined retainer revenue, $6,000 monthly, approximately $72,000 annually, plus additional project fees. In December, Nuclear Safety Solutions formally offered me a consulting arrangement, $150 per hour for active safety work, $1,200 monthly retainer for availability and consultation. 6-month contract renewable at my discretion. I accepted because it was guaranteed revenue, and Nuclear Safety Solutions represented one of the most reliable sources of emergency work. Marcus Webb lasted until January. The board terminated him after they calculated that his decision to fire me during the Millstone crisis had cost Nuclear Safety Solutions approximately $195,000 in lost client contracts, emergency recovery costs, and consulting fees they were now paying me instead of employing me directly. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were now paying me more in 6 months than they'd paid me in 2 years as an employee. I stayed independent. By late 2024, I was managing 4 long-term consulting relationships with nuclear facilities across the Southeast. Annual revenue was approaching $140,000. I was working approximately 65% of the hours I'd worked at Nuclear Safety Solutions while earning nearly twice my previous salary. Michael's insulin supplies were covered in full by February. No rationing, no stress, no sleepless nights wondering how we'd manage. Linda's physical therapy sessions were paid without insurance fights. We started talking about that accessible house renovation she'd always wanted. When Michael called to thank me, his voice was different. Lighter, Dad. I can actually focus on my studies instead of worrying about diabetes costs. You gave me something Mom always wanted, the freedom to learn without medical pressure. At 49, I thought my career was winding down. Instead, it was just getting started. The most dangerous employee to fire isn't the one who complains about salary. It's the one who's literally in the middle of solving a crisis that nobody else knows how to solve when you decide they're expendable. Marcus wanted to reduce headcount and eliminate what he saw as an expensive senior engineer. He got exactly what he wanted. I was eliminated. But my expertise wasn't eliminated. It just got a lot more expensive. Getting fired at 49 wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of something better. Sometimes getting fired isn't punishment. It's liberation from a company that never deserved your talent in the first place.